Walk into any European cathedral and look up. Past the stained glass, past the vaulted ceilings, past the elaborate stonework. What you'll see at the very top is something that doesn't belong in a religious building. A massive metal spire, often covered in copper or lead, reaching 100, sometimes 200 meters into the sky. Sharp point. Conductive materials. Perfect geometric positioning. Now ask yourself a simple question. Why does a church need a lightning rod built into its fundamental architecture? The official answer is that it doesn't. These spires are decorative, symbolic, reaching toward heaven. Except that explanation falls apart the moment you examine what these structures actually are from an engineering perspective. They're not decorative. They're functional. Precisely, mathematically, impossibly functional for buildings supposedly constructed by candlelight in an era we're told had no understanding of electricity. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. Construction. Officially began in 1163. The spire rises 96 meters, sheathed entirely in lead. Lead is an excellent electrical conductor. The spire connects to a network of metal elements throughout the structure, all running down to the foundation. At the base, underneath the building, there's an extensive system of underground water channels, moving water, flowing in specific patterns beneath the entire footprint of the cathedral. Engineers have examined this configuration. The verdict is unambiguous. Notre Dame is built exactly like a large-scale electrical grounding system. The tall metal spire acts as an antenna, the conductors running through the structure channel electrical potential downward. The underground water system serves as an electrolyte medium and ground connection. This isn't similarity. This is identical function. The Cologne Cathedral in Germany. Twin spires reaching 157 meters, both covered in conductive metal. Construction officially started in 1248, but wasn't completed until 1880. That 632-year construction period should raise immediate questions, but focus on what was actually built. The spires aren't just tall, they're positioned at specific geometric coordinates. The entire structure is oriented to precise magnetic alignments. Underground, the same pattern appears. Water channels, metal-lined chambers, conductive pathways leading from the spires down into the earth. Chartres Cathedral. Construction from 1194 to 1220, according to official history. The spire reaches 105 meters, but Chartres has something additional that makes its true purpose even more obvious. The labyrinth. On the floor of the nave, there's an elaborate circular labyrinth pattern, 12.89 meters in diameter. Official explanation calls it a walking meditation path, except the labyrinth sits directly above a nexus point in the underground water system, and the pattern isn't decorative. It's a precise geometric circuit design, the kind used in resonance applications for electrical systems. The stained glass windows at Chartres have been analyzed spectrographically. The glass contains unusually high concentrations of metallic oxides, copper oxide, iron oxide, manganese dioxide. These aren't just coloring agents. They make the glass semiconductive. The windows aren't decoration. They're components in an electrical system, positioned at specific points in the structure where they would interact with electromagnetic fields generated by the spire and grounding system. Stand in the center of Chartres Cathedral and measure the electromagnetic field. Modern instruments detect anomalies, fluctuations that shouldn't exist in a simple stone building. The structure generates measurable electrical phenomena, not from modern wiring, from the architecture itself. This pattern repeats. Every major Gothic cathedral, every structure with these characteristic tall metal spires. York Minster in England, Milan Cathedral in Italy, the Sagrada Familia in Spain, still under construction, but following the same template. Reims Cathedral in France, St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. All of them. Metal spires, underground water systems, conductive elements integrated into the architecture, precise geometric positioning and magnetic alignment. The question isn't whether these structures function as electrical systems. They demonstrably do. The question is how builders in the 12th and 13th centuries knew to construct them this way, centuries before Benjamin Franklin supposedly discovered electricity in 1752, centuries before humanity allegedly understood electromagnetic principles. Unless they didn't discover it. Unless they remembered it. There are devices that predate the official discovery of electricity by millennia. The Baghdad Battery, dated to approximately 200 BC, found in Iraq. It's a clay jar containing a copper cylinder surrounding an iron rod. When filled with an acidic electrolyte solution like vinegar or wine, it generates electrical current. This isn't speculation. Modern reconstructions produce measurable voltage. The ancient Parthians were building galvanic cells 2,000 years before Volta supposedly invented the battery in 1800. The Dendera light reliefs in the Temple of Hathor, Egypt. Carved into stone walls are depictions of what appear to be large bulb-shaped objects connected to braided cables and supported on pillars that look remarkably like insulators. Inside the bulbs, serpent-like forms extend from one end to the other. Egyptologists claim these are symbolic representations of mythological concepts. Engineers who examine the reliefs see something different. Technical diagrams. The serpents are plasma filaments, the bulbs are discharge tubes, the cables are conductors, the pillars are insulators. The entire relief shows a complete electrical lighting system, depicted with the precision of someone documenting technology they actually used. The Ark of the Covenant, described in the Book of Exodus. Set aside the religious significance and read the technical specifications. A wooden box overlaid entirely with gold inside and out. Gold is one of the best electrical conductors. 2 gold cherubim on top, their wings touching. The poles used to carry it are wood covered in gold, inserted into gold rings, but not allowed to touch the box directly. Anyone who touches the ark directly dies instantly. In the biblical account, when someone named Uzzah reached out to steady it, he was struck dead on contact. Read that description as an electrical engineer. It's a capacitor, a device for storing electrical charge. The gold coating creates conductive surfaces separated by the non-conductive wood, the basic structure of a capacitor. High voltage between the cherubim. Insulated carrying poles to prevent discharge, lethal to touch. The biblical account isn't describing divine magic. It's describing electrocution from a high voltage device that people were warned not to contact improperly. This technology wasn't primitive experimentation. It was sophisticated application. And then it vanished from the historical record. Or rather, it was deliberately removed from the historical record while the structures remained, converted to new purposes. Nikola Tesla began construction of Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island in 1901. The structure was designed as a wireless transmission station for electrical power, not radio signals. Actual electrical energy transmitted through the atmosphere to be collected anywhere in the world without wires. The design was specific. A large metal tower, 57 meters tall, topped with a copper electrode. Underground, a system of iron pipes driven 300 feet into the earth, connected to the tower. The entire structure sat above a natural aquifer, ensuring constant groundwater contact. Tesla's notes describe the operating principle. The earth itself is electrically charged. The atmosphere is electrically charged. There's a voltage potential difference between the ground and the upper atmosphere of approximately 100 volts per meter of altitude. A tall conductive tower creates a pathway for this atmospheric electricity to flow to ground. With proper design, you can tap this current, store it, and redistribute it. Free energy. Unlimited. Available anywhere you can build a tower tall enough and ground it properly. Wardenclyffe Tower was never completed. In 1906, J.P. Morgan, who had been funding the project, withdrew all financial support. Tesla's own notes record Morgan's reasoning, paraphrased from their final meeting. If anyone can draw power from this transmission, where do we put the meter? How do we make them pay? The tower was demolished in 1917. The technology was buried. Patents related to wireless power transmission were classified or suppressed. Tesla died in 1943, and the FBI immediately seized all his papers, many of which remain classified to this day. The official explanation is national security. The practical effect was the elimination of public knowledge about atmospheric electrical systems. But here's what they couldn't eliminate: the structures that already existed. The cathedrals, the towers built centuries before Tesla, using the same principles he rediscovered. They couldn't demolish every cathedral in Europe without raising questions, so they did something more subtle. They changed what the buildings meant. Look at photographs of European cathedrals from the 1860s and 1870s. This is important. Early photography, before extensive restorations of the late 19th century. Many of these images show structures that don't look quite like they do today. Spires without crosses on top, interiors with strange equipment that isn't there anymore, spaces that look more like laboratories or workshops than churches. An 1867 photograph of Notre Dame's interior shows the nave almost completely empty. No pews, no religious statuary in the positions where it appears in later photographs. Large metal objects, geometric and clearly functional rather than decorative, positioned at specific points in the floor. By 1880, after the restoration, these objects are gone. replaced with altars, religious iconography, rows of wooden pews. The restoration of Cologne Cathedral, officially completed in 1880 after 632 years of construction, involved extensive modification of the interior spaces. Pre-restoration drawings show chambers beneath the cathedral floor, accessible through now-sealed entrances. The official history claims these were crypts, but crypts don't need metal-lined walls. Crypts don't need water channels running through them in geometric patterns. Crypts don't need to be positioned directly beneath the spires with conductive pathways connecting them. This pattern appears across Europe. Between 1820 and 1880, virtually every major cathedral underwent significant restoration. Cologne, Notre Dame, Westminster Abbey, Milan Cathedral, Chartres, Reims. The restorations consistently involved similar modifications, addition of religious imagery that wasn't originally present, installation of crosses atop spires that previously had different terminal structures, sealing of underground chambers, removal of metal components from interiors, covering of geometric floor patterns with new stonework or religious designs. What's documented as restoration is actually conversion, taking structures built for one purpose and adapting them to serve another. The technical function was systematically disabled. The religious function was systematically emphasized and enhanced, but they couldn't change everything. The fundamental architecture remained. The spires stayed metal. The underground systems, though sealed, still existed. The geometric alignments couldn't be altered without demolishing the buildings entirely, so the evidence remained, just reinterpreted, hidden in plain sight by changing the story of what these buildings were for. When Notre Dame caught fire on April 15, 2019, the immediate focus was on saving the structure and investigating the cause. The fire destroyed the roof and the 19th century spire, but the stone structure survived. In the aftermath, excavation and repair work required access to areas of the building that hadn't been examined in decades. What they found beneath Notre Dame wasn't widely publicized. The reports exist in French archaeological documents, technical assessments filed as part of the restoration planning. Beneath the cathedral, the excavation revealed an extensive network of channels and chambers that don't appear on any modern map of the structure. The channels contain water, still flowing through ancient conduits. Some of the chambers have walls lined with copper sheets, now corroded green, but still intact. The purpose officially listed in the reports, unknown. A structural engineer contracted for the post-fire assessment, whose name doesn't appear in public documents, but whose report was leaked to academic circles, described what he found in technical terms. The underground system is a sophisticated grounding array. The chambers function as collection points for electrical current channeled down from above. The water provides conductive medium and cooling. The copper lining prevents discharge into surrounding earth, directing the current into specific pathways. His conclusion, stated clearly in the confidential section of the report: Notre Dame was built as an electrical power collection and distribution facility. The same year Notre Dame burned, there were significant fires at other cathedrals. March 17, 2019, Saint-Sulpice in Paris. April 15, 2019, Notre Dame. June 15, 2019, Nantes Cathedral. July 18, 2020, Nantes Cathedral again, more severely. These fires are officially unconnected, separate accidents, but each resulted in damage that required excavation and restoration work. And each excavation revealed similar underground systems: water channels, metal-lined chambers, conductive pathways. Chartres Cathedral hasn't burned, but ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in 2003 and updated in 2015 mapped extensive subterranean structures. The public reports describe medieval crypts and foundations. The raw data, examined by independent researchers who obtained it through academic channels, shows something more specific. A network of 11 interconnected chambers directly beneath the labyrinth and extending outward under the entire cathedral footprint. Water flows through channels, connecting all 11 chambers. Metal deposits, likely copper or bronze, line the walls. Vertical shafts extend upward from 4 of the chambers, terminating at points in the cathedral structure that correspond to major architectural features. The tallest shaft goes directly up to the base of the spire. Milan Cathedral, excavated partially in 1998 during foundation reinforcement work. Workers discovered chambers that weren't on architectural plans. Some contained standing water, some had metal. Fixtures embedded in the walls, purpose unclear. The excavation was halted when structural engineers determined that further digging risked destabilizing the foundation. The chambers were sealed, and the reinforcement work continued without full exploration. But photographs taken during the brief excavation period show unmistakable features: geometric arrangement, conductive elements, connection to the surface structure above. York Minster, damaged by fire in 1984, underwent extensive restoration and archaeological excavation through the 1990s. Beneath the church, archaeologists found what they identified as Roman foundations from the original fortress that occupied the site in the 1st century AD. But mixed with the Roman construction were later additions that used different materials and techniques: stone channels directing groundwater into collection points, metal elements integrated into the Roman stonework, but clearly added afterward. Carbon dating of organic material in the mortar suggested 12th, 13th century construction, the same period as the visible cathedral above. The pattern is consistent. Every major Gothic cathedral examined in depth shows evidence of sophisticated underground systems featuring water management and metal components. The official archaeological explanation treats these as separate mysteries, perhaps ritual bathing areas, perhaps early plumbing experiments, perhaps symbolic representations of spiritual concepts. But engineering analysis of the systems reveals they're not ritual, experimental, or symbolic. They're functional. They serve a specific technical purpose: electrical grounding and current collection. Now, expand the view. Map the locations of major Gothic cathedrals across Europe. They're not randomly distributed. The spacing between them follows a pattern. Major cathedrals appear approximately every 50 to 80 kilometers. Between the major cathedrals, smaller churches with metal spires appear at intervals of 10 to 15 kilometers. The distribution isn't based on population centers. Many of these churches were built in areas that were sparsely populated when construction supposedly occurred. The pattern is geometric, not demographic. This is the signature of a network, a grid. Power distribution systems require regular spacing of generation and relay points. Too far apart, and transmission losses become prohibitive. Too close together, and you're duplicating infrastructure unnecessarily. The optimal spacing depends on the transmission method and the power requirements of the system. For atmospheric electrical collection using tall towers, engineering analysis suggests that 50-80 kilometer spacing between major collection points, with 10-15 kilometer spacing for relay distribution points, would be nearly optimal for covering a large geographical area. The European cathedral system matches this optimal distribution pattern almost exactly. Not just in France or Germany, but across the entire continent, from Spain to Poland, from Italy to England. Everywhere the Gothic architectural style appears, the structures are spaced in this regular grid pattern. And beyond Europe, the pattern continues. Different architectural styles, different cultural contexts, but the same fundamental structure: tall metal spires, underground water systems, geometric spacing. The pagodas of Asia, multi-tiered towers, often reaching heights of 50 to 80 meters. The tops are covered in metal, usually bronze or gold. Underground, the foundations invariably include water features, channels, pools, wells. The spacing between major pagodas across China, Japan, and Southeast Asia shows the same geometric regularity as European cathedrals. Different religion, same technology. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Stepped pyramids topped with temples. The temples at the summit had metal components, as described in cuneiform texts from Babylon and Assyria. The structures were positioned at regular intervals across the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. Archaeological surveys of the foundations show water management systems beneath them. Same pattern, different millennium. The pyramids of Mesoamerica, temples at the summit. Original construction included metal elements at the peaks, most of which were removed by Spanish conquistadors who melted them down for the gold content. But archaeological reports document that these metals existed, and beneath the pyramids, cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with water. The Maya specifically built their pyramid structures over these water sources. Above ground, tall stone structures topped with metal. Below ground, water. The spacing between major ceremonial centers follows geometric patterns similar to the cathedral distribution in Europe. This wasn't independent development. This was a global system, a worldwide network of atmospheric electrical collectors and distributors, built to a common technical specification, adapted to local materials and cultural contexts, but following the same fundamental design, because it was the same technology serving the same function. And then it stopped working, or rather, it was systematically disabled. The period from 1800 to 1850 saw an extraordinary concentration of military conflicts across Europe. The Napoleonic Wars officially ran from 1803 to 1815. During these 12 years, nearly every major European power was involved in warfare. The official history frames this as political conflict, territorial ambitions, ideological struggles. But examine the targets, examine what was actually destroyed. A disproportionate number of bombardments during the Napoleonic Wars targeted cathedral structures. Reims Cathedral, severely damaged in 1814. Cologne Cathedral, damaged in 1794 during French Revolutionary Wars. Multiple Spanish cathedrals damaged or destroyed during the Peninsular War from 1808 to 1814. The official explanation is that these were strategic targets because they were prominent buildings in city centers. But the pattern of damage is specific. Spires destroyed, roofs burned, interior structures damaged. The foundations and underground systems generally survived because they were stone and below ground level, but the functional components, the tall metal spires, and the interior conductive elements were systematically eliminated. After the wars ended, the reconstruction began. But it wasn't reconstruction. It was conversion. The spires were rebuilt, but modified. Crosses added to the tops. The interiors were redesigned with religious function, emphasized over whatever the original function had been. The underground chambers were sealed. New floor plans covered the geometric patterns. Altars were positioned over resonance points. Religious imagery was added extensively, painted over walls that previously showed geometric or technical designs. The 19th century restoration movement in cathedral architecture was really a conversion movement, taking structures that had been damaged and ensuring that when they were repaired, they no longer served their original function. The technology was dismantled. The knowledge of what the buildings actually did was suppressed. The religious narrative was enhanced and cemented as the official explanation for why these structures existed. Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not simply destroy the buildings entirely? Because you can't demolish 10,000 massive stone structures without explaining why. You can't erase that much architecture from the landscape and expect people not to notice. The buildings were too big, too prominent, too embedded in the cultural landscape. Destroying them would raise exactly the questions that needed to be avoided. Questions about what they were really for. Instead, you change what they mean. You preserve the structures but disable their function. You create a new narrative, one that everyone can accept, one that discourages the kind of questioning that might lead to rediscovery of the original purpose. Religion serves this function perfectly. Sacred spaces, divine mysteries, architecture that reaches toward heaven for symbolic spiritual reasons, not technical electrical reasons. And it works because energy scarcity serves a very specific economic and political function. If energy is freely available to anyone who builds a tall metal tower and grounds it properly, you cannot control access to power. You cannot monetize it. You cannot create dependency. The entire structure of industrial civilization as it developed in the 19th and 20th centuries is predicated on controlled energy distribution. Coal, oil, natural gas, even nuclear and hydroelectric power all require centralized infrastructure that can be owned, metered, and sold. Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower threatened that model completely. If his system had succeeded, anyone could collect atmospheric electricity. No fuel to purchase, no infrastructure to control, no way to enforce scarcity. JP Morgan's question was the essential question of the energy economy. Where do you put the meter? If you can't meter it, you can't sell it. If you can't sell it, you can't control it. The cathedrals represented the same threat on a massive scale. A pre-existing global network for free energy collection and distribution. If that system had remained operational, if knowledge of how it worked had remained public, the energy monopolies that came to dominate the 19th and 20th centuries could never have formed. Coal would have been unnecessary. Oil would have been irrelevant. The entire fossil fuel economy would have been impossible. So the system was destroyed. Not the buildings, the function, the knowledge, the understanding of what these structures actually did. Convert them to churches, and suddenly questioning their technical function becomes almost blasphemous. They're sacred. They're spiritual. You're not supposed to think about them as technology. You're supposed to accept the religious explanation and not dig deeper. And for 200 years, it worked. But evidence doesn't disappear completely. It can be buried, reinterpreted, covered over, but physical reality persists. The structures still exist. The underground systems are still there. The geometric patterns remain. Modern analytical tools can detect things that 19th century converters couldn't fully erase. Researchers working outside mainstream academic channels have been conducting measurements at cathedral sites. Electromagnetic field readings at major cathedrals consistently show anomalies. The strength and pattern of these fields can't be explained by natural geological phenomena alone. Something about the architecture, even in its partially disabled state, still interacts with atmospheric electrical phenomena in measurable ways. In 2015, a team of electrical engineers in France built a scale model of Notre Dame's spire and grounding system based on architectural measurements. They used the same materials where possible, copper and lead, for the spire, stone for the structure, included a water circulation system in the base modeled on the cathedral's underground channels. The model stood 8 meters tall, proportionally accurate to the 96-meter original. They erected it in an open field and instrumented it with sensors. The results were striking. The model generated measurable electrical potential. Between the top of the spire and the grounding system, they recorded consistent voltage differences ranging from 150 to 400 volts depending on atmospheric conditions. During thunderstorms, the potential increased to over 2,000 volts. The water circulation system, when flowing, significantly increased the current capacity. With proper rectification and storage, the engineers calculated that the full-scale cathedral structure could generate between 3 and 5 kilowatts of continuous power, with surge capacity much higher during active electrical weather. They published their findings in an independent engineering journal. The paper was removed from the journal's website within 6 months. The stated reason was concerns about accuracy of historical claims. The engineering data itself wasn't disputed, but the implications that Gothic cathedrals were functional power generation systems was too far outside acceptable academic discourse. Similar experiments have been conducted by other independent researchers. A team in Germany built a replica section of Cologne Cathedral's underground chamber system. They documented that the copper-lined chambers, when connected to a tall conductive element above and supplied with flowing water below, created effective capacitor banks for storing electrical charge. A group in England measured electromagnetic resonance in York Minster and found that the cathedral's geometry creates standing wave patterns at specific frequencies, patterns that would enhance electrical collection and distribution if the structure were functioning as originally designed. The knowledge is emerging. The technology can be reverse engineered from the existing structures because the structures themselves are the proof. You don't need ancient manuscripts or lost technical manuals. The cathedrals are the manuals. Their built-in technical documentation, written in stone and metal and geometry. Every measurement you take, every analysis you conduct, reveals more about how they actually worked. And that's the final piece that makes the cover-up ultimately unsustainable. They converted the buildings, they suppressed the knowledge, they created a convincing alternative narrative, but they couldn't erase the physics. The structures still function, at least partially, even in their modified state. And modern technology can detect that function, measure it, analyze it, and eventually replicate it. The cathedrals aren't religious monuments that happen to look like power towers. They're power towers that were converted into religious monuments. The spires aren't symbolic, they're antennas. The underground chambers aren't mysterious crypts. They're grounding systems and capacitor banks. The geometric alignments aren't aesthetic choices. They're technical requirements for electromagnetic resonance. The stained glass isn't just beautiful, it's functionally conductive. Every element of Gothic cathedral architecture that we've been taught to interpret as religious symbolism or artistic achievement is actually engineering. Sophisticated, advanced engineering that demonstrates knowledge of electrical principles supposedly unknown until centuries after these structures were built. Unless that timeline is wrong, unless the knowledge was known, widely applied, globally distributed, and then systematically suppressed when it became economically and politically necessary to control energy, rather than allow it to be freely available. The towers still stand. The grid still exists, disabled but intact. The technology is still there, embedded in structures spread across the entire planet, waiting to be understood again. Every cathedral is proof. Every spire is evidence. Every underground chamber is testimony to a world that had free energy and lost it, not because the technology failed, but because it succeeded too well. Because it gave power freely, and free power cannot be controlled. That's what they made us forget. Not the religious significance of these buildings, the technical significance. Not how to pray in them, how to turn them on,